The United Arab Emirates Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed has discussed developments in Yemen with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Earlier, the UAE said that it will pull its forces from the country after a deadline for the withdrawal was made by the Saudi-backed Presidential Leadership Council. Tension has been high over an Emirati-backed separatist group in Yemen. Crowds in the city of Aden have rallied in support of the Southern Transitional Council. The STC wants an independent state in southern Yemen. It seized two southeastern provinces, including major oil fields, as part of a new offensive earlier this month. Riyadh has accused the UAE of shipping weapons to the STC, an accusation that Abu Dhabi denies. Earlier, a strike by Saudi forces revealed a very public split in a regional alliance over the conflict in Yemen. The airstrikes targeted Yemen's Mukalla port in the country's Hadramaut province that was recently seized by the STC. So let's break down who controls what in Yemen, and we'll have a discussion with our guest on the back of this. The Iran-backed Houthis control Sana'a and the north. That means they hold the capital and key northern trade routes, giving them a strong strategic position. That's the Houthis. The UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council that we've just been talking about, the STC, controls several cities along with major ports, including Aden and Socotra. The internationally recognized Presidential Council, that's Yemen's government, backed by Saudi Arabia, controls parts of Hadramaut, Al-Mahra, and central coastal areas. They aim to maintain government authority and unify Yemen under a single administration. Fara Al-Muslimi is a research fellow in the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. Fara, you're joining us live from London. Thank you very much for being on the program. The UAE say that they only had a small number of counterterrorism forces left in Yemen anyway. Now, if they pull them out, as they say they will, is this the end of the UAE's presence and influence in Yemen?
Thank you very much for having me. In a way, yes, and in a way, no. UAE anyways had a very small number of counterterrorism forces that were in Yemen since its major withdrawal in 2019. So that's an end to its counterterrorism operation, which is something actually will be a big lose. At the same time, as an influence, UAE is still present in South Yemen with more than 100,000 of proxy troops diverted between STC, diverted between Salafi groups, the Bergeret groups, and also between in the west coast of Yemen national resistance forces. So in a way, I feel no. In fact, the war and the role of UAE in Yemen will be much more aggressive since it will switch more directly from a direct intervention into a proxy wars. And the proxy wars are definitely much more destructive and reckless than direct wars. So definitely no, it's not an end for UAE role in Yemen, but it's an end of UAE responsibilities in Yemen.
Okay. The last 24 hours have exposed a widening rift between Saudi Arabia and Yemen and what they're both trying to, Saudi Arabia and the UAE and what they're both trying to accomplish in Yemen. Could you briefly describe, so we're all on the same page, Saudi's interests in Yemen versus the UAE's interests in Yemen?
Well, this is not news that the UAE and the Saudi Arabia have different priorities in Yemen, and we will come into that. The news this time is that they're going public after each other, and that's quite problematic because it's out of the playbook of not just Arab Gulf politics, but also out of the day-to-day life arrangements in that part of the world. Now, for a long time, UAE and Saudi Arabia have had a very different agenda and the priorities in Yemen. UAE is a small country, small bureaucracy, does not have borders with Yemen, and which means it can actually be much more adventurous. It also has a number one enemy that's called the Muslim Brotherhood in Yemen, and it doesn't mind more than one Yemen. On the contrary, Saudi Arabia is a huge bureaucracy, old investor in Yemen's politics, shares 1,500 kilometers of borders with Yemen, and its best friend in Yemen is the best enemy of UAE, which is the Muslim Brotherhood's Yemen's Islah Party. All of these have come together in the different phases in the past that sometimes had a larger, wider regional arrangement, issues and differences, whether about Saudi 2030 or issues in Sudan or vision for Syria. But in Yemen, they have constantly went different routes than they ever claimed to be in that past. And again, the difference is not that they have a different agenda. The difference is that they have this time. And that's why I believe this is a quite serious diplomatic and military crisis. They have gone after each other publicly in Yemen. And at the same time, they also, both of them, have had a very different arrangement with the West about what they are doing in Yemen. UAE has tried to sell itself as the counter-terrorism contractor. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has tried to install itself as the main guardian of Yemen's unity. These are very different topics that ultimately lead to anything but good friendships.
So if we zoom out from Yemen, are there wider lessons for the region here?
No one should ever go to a war. This is 10 years ago from now. In 2015, both countries went in one war. And this is a strategic issue in that regard. When you go into a war, you basically dismiss everything else as a choices, as a diplomatic tool. Number two is it means a lack of a strategic vision. It means a lack of a mediation. It means a lack of always a need for an outsider, for an adult to be in the room. And this time, unfortunately, there is no more adult even in the West. So this is a lesson. Unless UAE and Saudi Arabia actually talk it by themselves, openly, publicly, even if somehow discreetly, this is not going to be anyone's issue other than theirs. But it's also an example of how long wars, and Yemen is an example of that, ultimately doesn't change regime, but it changes societies. Today, Yemen is suffering from its friends, not anymore Iran as it did in 2015, but rather from the conflicts and disputes of the very two countries that actually said they were helping Yemen, which is UAE and Saudi Arabia. But these changing alliances and dynamics of power structures in the Middle East are constant also because of a larger issue. This issue is the legitimacy and accountability. No one is going to be held accountable for Yemen war, and no one seems to be going to be held accountable for this new crisis. And that's a quite dangerous and quite a depressing thing to watch.
Fara Al-Muslimi of Chatham House, thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss out, get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.